This is In Step with Compliance, a podcast by the Modern Practice Solutions team for dental professionals.
Welcome to In Step with Compliance, sponsored by Modern Practice Solutions. My name is Olivia and I'll be your moderator for today's episode. Our topic is, do I have to pay the employees to attend a CE event? Nothing can frustrate an employee more than asking them to attend a course on a usual day that they work and not compensating them. But how does the law feel about it? Is it required to pay employees for their time to attend a CE event? The short answer is it depends. The Fair Labor Standards Act requirement for employers to pay non-exempt employees training time depends on the following criteria. The training must be voluntary. The training must take place outside of normal work hours. The training should not be directly related to the performance of the employee's job, and no work should be performed during the training. So all of these conditions must be satisfied in order for the training not to be considered compensable time, meaning that the employee has to be paid. So we need to get this right to avoid any complaints. So if you require an employee to participate in a course, then obviously the employee is paid for the time spent, even if it occurs over a lunchtime session. And this also includes regulatory training, such as required OSHA and HIPAA training. And as I mentioned, some prefer to do it over a lunch period, but that's really irrelevant because if it's mandatory, they're on the clock. Now, if, for example, a hygienist or assistant wants to go to a CE cruise, and these courses are not required by the employer, then obviously the employee may not be compensated for the time spent during the CE session. So to avoid confusion, what we recommend is that you send a memo in writing or an email would be fine to the employee who is asked to attend a CE event and lay it out in very plain black and white language whether the course is required or not and how compensation is addressed. For example, maybe it's the Hinman Dental Meeting or Chicago Midwinter or the North Star meeting, and you send a memo stating that you would love for the employees to participate in the course, however, it is not required. So they would not be paid if it's not required. However, the employer is agreeable to paying the travel expense and the tuition to these courses. So that's one way it might be handled. Another way would be, we're going to have an OSHA presenter at such and such date. This is mandatory training. You are required to attend and you will be compensated for your time. We also suggest, so that there's no confusion, that you clarify how business travel is compensated. The standard mileage rate for IRS purposes is set, and so you might want to consult what that current range is. And also, you may want to point out if there's any meal compensation, what the cap is. What is the most you pay for a lunch meal or a dinner meal? Or maybe some stipulations that an alcohol beverage is not compensated. But keep in mind that the time spent during travel may be required to compensate the employee. So according to the Department of Labor, time spent traveling during normal business hours is considered work time. So we realize that participating in continuing education is a very critical component of not only keeping our licenses current, but also keeping our skills sharp, keeping people motivated and engaged, which is critical to maintain top-notch employees. So now I want to interview some of our very own trainers who have backgrounds in dentistry on some of their ideas about CE. So let's get started with Caitlin. Caitlin was formerly a dental hygienist. So Caitlin, what are your thoughts on how a dentist or an office manager may direct a hygienist on CE courses? What do you think about that?
There are definitely cases where having your employees, having your hygienists or assistants take CEs can be valuable for the practice. A good example would be perhaps the practice gets a new piece of equipment or wants to implement a new procedure. Maybe you're doing some type of new irrigation, you're using a new air polisher, and you want the hygienist to be familiar with that new procedure. You might have a representative from the new product, or maybe an educator come in on lunch to train your hygienist as to how to use this device or perform the procedure. And this is a great example of where the practice is required to pay those hygienists for this mandatory lunchtime CE. But of course, in the long term, this would likely pay off for the practice because now you have a new product you can offer your clients, your patients.
And good point, Caitlin. Another thing to add to what you're saying is, some of the listeners may be familiar with a pay differential. And so if here's what the Department of Labor cares about, that the minimum of minimum wage is paid. So we realize that if the hygienist is being paid uh, her or his hygiene wages per hour, if they're just sitting through a lecture during a lunch period, they still have to be paid if it's mandatory, but you may agree on a CE rate for training time, which would be fine. But they have to know that ahead. You can't just lay that on them when they receive their paycheck. And now you have some unhappy hygienist, and it could really dampen their spirit in participating in CE. So, Brenda, having been an office manager and working a lot in the orthodontic world, how would you select classes for your dental team members in the past?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, Olivia. So it depends on what the learning opportunity is. If it's something connected to perhaps our software program that we're using throughout the office, we might choose to send an administrative team member to learn the front office and administrative side of that software. But we might also choose to send one of our clinical team members to learn the clinical side of the software, such as patient charting and uploading x-rays and things like that. Other times, we may have a situation, as Caitlin mentioned, where perhaps we're learning a new orthodontic procedure. And so we may only choose to have our clinical team participate in that training session. So it really depends on what we're training on and what the learning opportunity is. And then there are also times where you might choose to send your entire team for something. Maybe there's a fantastic motivational seminar in your area or something like that. So you might want to have your entire team exposed to that great learning opportunity.
Yeah, that's some good input. And, like I have to go to CE for my law license. And, my opinion is if I have to sit through training courses, I want it to be relevant to what I do. I don't take classes just because they're free or just because they're available online. I want my time to be well spent learning something that I can incorporate day to day. So thank you, Brenda, for sharing how you personally would help select classes for your team. Now, Terri, you've been a consultant for a very long time and previously a surgical dental assistant. I would like you to focus for our listeners on those that are tuning in that serve as the privacy officer or they're the OSHA safety coordinator. What are your suggestions for those individuals?
Thank you, Olivia. That was a great question. The way I would approach continuing education as a clinical person would be to address issues that are relatable to my job task. So if I'm a clinical team, I'm going to want to take courses that are relevant to clinical procedures. I also want to point out the importance of attending CE credits if you are safety coordinator or the HIPAA security privacy officer. Actually, that is how I met Olivia. I was a clinical team member that was the OSHA coordinator, and I wanted to attend this seminar. And honestly, it was the best day of my life. I had been attending OSHA seminars for years that were all about lockout, tagout, and things that did not apply to a dental office. So I attended Olivia's seminar, and I was blown away because it was 100% related to my task at work, my job. So I approached Olivia during the break and I said, I want to do what you're doing. And so, I mean, it's amazing, your 5-hour CE, 2-hour CE, how it can just change your world. And it's so important to take the CE courses so that you're ahead of the game. You know what is supposed to be, what are the regulations? What is my job to enforce these regulations? And then you take that back to the office manager or the office owner and say, hey, these are the new regulations. We need to step it up. And I just think CE credits are the best thing ever invented.
You made a lot of good points there, Terri. And one is, if you're serving as the OSHA safety officer or you're the HIPAA privacy or security officer, and that's in addition to your regular job, you would want to factor that in when you choose courses so you can really develop your skills in compliance. And as she mentioned, that's how I met her. I mean, I was teaching these long 6-hour dental OSHA classes. I was on a national speaking tour for 5 years. And Terri came up to me just excited because it was all dental specific and she was learning so much and motivated. And she said the magic words, I want to do what you do. And I was actually going to start law school at that time. So I was so excited that she shared this interest, and she made and is making a great trainer and consultant. And so that's an important point for our listeners, is that, if you wear that hat in compliance, then definitely choose some CE courses that's relevant to compliance, so that you can make sure you're staying up to date, because rules change, regulations change, interpretations might even change. So we hope that this episode helped you understand when a CE course must be paid for the employee's time being spent, when it does not have to be paid for, and some of the considerations on paying for business travel. So please tune in again with our next episode, and thanks again for tuning in.